Hi, what's up? I'm DJ Sixsmith. You're watching The Sit Down. Joan E. Solsman here with us, senior writer from CNET. Joan, what's going on? How are you?
I'm great. I'm really looking forward to all these blockbuster movies of the summer that are going on, right?
Yeah, it's been quite a year for the movie industry, to put it
Yeah.
mildly. Of all the different industries impacted by COVID, I mean, the movie theater industry is certainly right up there. It's been a crazy time.
Yeah, beyond the fact that social distancing and coronavirus prevention measures have shut down cinemas, you also have the fact that social distancing has shut down movie production. So all these studios, they have big budget blockbusters that they can't put in theaters, and they also can't make more big budget blockbusters for when they can put movies in theaters.
Yeah, you read some of these stories about some of these companies who are trying to go in different countries and film this stuff. Like, they're trying to get as creative as possible, but I mean, this is happening all over the world. I mean, obviously here in America, things are pretty rough with COVID, but like, you can't shoot anywhere right now. It's kind of a rough situation for everybody.
Yeah, and there are ways that some studios are able to get around it. Obviously, live action is the thing that's impacted the most by, not being able to have humans in the same room in close quarters. Animation, on the other hand, there's a lot of ways you can do that remotely. It's certainly more challenging. All the difficulties people have in terms of collaboration, that's all true for animation as well. So there are ways that studios can cope, but there's still the problem of getting people in those cinema seats.
Yeah, a lot of these different companies have just punted until 2021 with a lot of these big blockbusters. And it really just makes me think about the future of the movie industry. And this week you wrote about Universal and AMC and their new deal. So basically it was 90 days before it went to streaming. Now it's 17 days. That's really significant to me. What do you think is the biggest impact of this new deal?
Yeah, the coronavirus pandemic has really started to erode some of these tightly held, long held standards around when a new movie comes out, where does it go first, and how long before people can start watching it in their homes. There used to be this kind of very sacredly held 90-day, 75 to longer day window that cinemas got to have a movie all to themselves before, let alone before it goes to streaming, let alone that before it goes to DVD or video on demand where you can rent it online. But now, because there's no way to put out a movie in a theater and have one of the biggest box office markets, the US, people go see it, that's forced studios to start to reckon with the idea that these windows, these structures, they aren't what consumers want at any point probably, and definitely not now when you can't actually go to see a movie.
These execs were so against the idea. I mean, even like you wrote about Trolls World Tour, and that was a big one that people wanted in theaters, and then it pops when it gets to streaming. I mean, this is something for years and years and years people have been fighting. So to me, it still feels like a surprise we're even getting to this point, but it also feels like people just realize it's inevitable. We're not going to have movies anytime soon in the theater. So how did Trolls World Tour kind of shift the thinking with some of these old school people?
Yeah, Trolls World Tour's release was definitely the catalyst that started all of this happening. So Trolls World Tour is obviously it's a sequel to the Universal DreamWorks original movie. And so it's not a gigantic budget movie, but it's pretty big. They couldn't release it in theaters in April when they wanted to. So they said, okay, what we're gonna do is have what's known as a premium video on demand release at the same time as they released it in like a sprinkling of theaters that happened to be open. That's verboten among cinemas. They don't like that. But the Universal and DreamWorks argument was like, well, what else do you expect us to do? We've already postponed all our biggest budget stuff to when you are open. We can't just keep sitting on everything, because then all these movies are going to be stacked on top of each other and our box office is going to get hit then anyways. The Trolls World Tour came out as sort of a high-priced rental online, and it was incredibly popular. Beyond the fact that you could watch it in your home, it's also catering to kids and families, which is an audience that is desperate for entertainment. Parents are looking for anything to keep their kids entertained right now when you're trapped at home. And so that started this repercussion where AMC, the biggest theater chain in the US, said, fine, you want to break the windows, then we won't screen any Universal movies on our screens henceforth forevermore, which includes things like the Fast and the Furious franchise,
Yeah.
biggest blockbuster franchise in the entire world. So that's how we got to this 17 day window now. AMC and Universal, DreamWorks, their whole stable of studios said, okay, you get 3 weekends in the theaters exclusively, and then we can do this sort of high-priced premium video on demand thing now. The complication is none of the other cinemas are agreeing to this yet. So we still don't really know what the future of movies is going to be like once theaters finally do reopen.
Do you think there will be others that do follow along, or do you think it's going to take a long time to make this kind of the industry standard here?
It's unclear. On the creator side, on the studio side, there's definitely interest among other studios to figure out ways to get outside of the rigidity of the old system. You know, the old way of doing things hasn't really caught up with how consumers like to watch content now. People like to watch what they want, when they want, where they want, and it's hard for consumers to understand, why do I have to wait 6 months after a movie hits theaters before it gets on Netflix or before it gets on HBO or some other way that I can stream it. But on the flip side, cinemas are terrified because they haven't figured out how to adapt their own model for streaming, given that they're a brick and mortar institution. And although cinemas have figured out some ways to kind of play in the later windows of movies, they haven't really figured, it's not like there's a Netflix for AMC or a Netflix for Cinemark. You know, they haven't figured out how to be a participant in those later windows yet. So it's really threatening, the idea that consumers and studios want to move beyond the past.
It really just makes me think, what are the future of movie theaters? Because in one scenario, I could say, like, you know, there's TV and radio. TV obviously has a bigger foothold in the industry, but radio is still there. Or it could be like a Netflix blockbuster situation where like Blockbuster is just completely obsolete. So how do you think about the future of the movie industry, and specifically people going and watching movies in a theater?
Yeah, Universal also provides a really interesting example there with the movie Tenet. That's the Christopher Nolan, you know, he's the director of like Inception, of Dunkirk, of lots of, is it Dunkirk? I might have gotten it wrong.
Dunkirk,
okay,
the Batman movies. Yeah, no, you're right there with it. Yeah.
He is a director who loves cinemas. He even wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post saying, once coronavirus started to really impact theaters, saying we need to save our cinemas. Tenet is a great example of kind of a mid-budget movie that could be released as premium video on demand. It's also a Universal movie. It's also something that could go on HBO Max, which is NBC Universal's new streaming service, given that we're in this unique time. But Christopher Nolan is one of those people that says, I want my movie in theaters. And so it's going to be released in this very odd way. It's going to be out internationally in theaters first, and then partially in some theaters in the US later as they open. It's going to be a very odd rollout, but it speaks to the fact that not only directors, filmmakers, and studios enjoy the cinematic experience, there are consumers that love it too. You can't reproduce that at home. I think what consumers want is more choice. And right now, because of the pandemic, they don't have as much choice for anything as they did. What we're seeing is that there might be some more options for people after the pandemic is over, theaters reopen. We might see that some of these rigid rules around when you get to watch a movie, they might start to relax, but it's really unclear exactly how it's going to take shape because so much is uncertain right now.
Yeah, it's going to be really fascinating to see that. And then even just the drive-in phenomenon during the last few months, like that's been really fun to see too. Like all these old movies people are pulling up. What do you make of all that the last few months?
I mean, that's an example where it's a really wonderful resurgence of a sort of lost way of watching an art form, right? So I guess cinemas would say, like, that's not going to save our business. On the consumer side, it is great. It's fun that you can have drive-ins, that they're having their moment in the sun after sort of being an outdated thing. It's kind of like how vinyl record sales are like through the roof compared to like iTunes downloads. But that's a small part of the overall market for movies, of watching new films. And so while that's really fun and really great to see that thriving, theaters and I think consumers and filmmakers that love the theatrical experience are still worried about what's going to happen.
You have all those people who love the cinematic experience, but it's really those people in the middle who could just be like, I'm going to wait 3 weeks until this comes out and pay $20. It's like, you know, same thing with cable. Like there's a huge number of people that still use cable, a ton of cord cutting going on, but like some older people just can't envision life without cable. Some people just can't envision life without going to the movies. Like, what do you think the cinemas can do to try and make it a little bit more universally appealing? Is there anything they can do, or is it going to just take time to kind of reimagine the business overall?
It might take time. You know, Steven Spielberg, of course, everyone knows Steven Spielberg, a famous director. He, before coronavirus, he once made the analogy that the cinema experience might become more like going to a Broadway show, where it's something maybe even higher price point, or has the option to be even higher price point than what people pay now, but you get all these bells and whistles. And we're starting to see that in cinemas already. Before the pandemic and all these closures, cinemas were investing in the really luxe seats that could recline, and having beer and wine and food that would be served to you. Sort of these higher end experiences that make it worth getting out of your house and paying more, because you get something extra that you just can't get at home, beyond the fact that you get the darkened theater and the big screen and the amazing sound. So you're already starting to see that start to take place, but it definitely hasn't gotten to the point where I think any consumer is like, yeah, I'm going to pay Broadway musical prices to go see Fast and the Furious 9. And now that we don't know if cinemas are going to survive, I don't know if we'll get there, but hopefully, for everyone's sake, there's a way to find a balance so there can be theatrical releases, and people can also choose when they get to watch their movies in the place that they want to.
One thing you can't replicate at home is watching a movie with an entire room full of other people. And I watched Once Upon a Time in Hollywood in the theater. And just like the last 30 minutes of that movie with everybody else, like people are freaking out, people are laughing, like it's not the same at home. So
right.
that seems like at least that's one thing that can actually benefit these cinemas, is like, you're not going to get an experience like this. And I think there's something to be said about that. What do you think about that idea?
Yeah, I agree. That's definitely one of the big parts of the appeal of having that in a cinema experience. And it's also, for all the ways that technology tries to replicate what you can get in the real world, in your own home, on your own device, there hasn't been a real killer app or killer service that's figured out that sort of social viewing, co-viewing experience when you're not actually literally getting everybody together in one room. Virtual watch parties are definitely more popular now in the pandemic, because everything that we're doing is virtual, it seems like. But nobody's really developed a way to make that not only replicate a theater experience, but even come close to approximating what it feels like to be watching something with a large group of people. We're starting to see companies try to figure that out, because there's more of an impetus to do it now than there was before. But you're right, that's something that can't be replicated. It's not really on the horizon that technology can do it in the foreseeable future.
Well, it's going to be an interesting few years for the movie industry. That's one thing that's clear. Joan, thanks so much for jumping on here. Really appreciate it. And we'll check out all your stuff on CNET, all right?
Thanks.